Imagine finding an iron axe from the year 1200. Still solid, still usable, almost untouched by rust. Now, compare that to the steel tools we buy today, already falling apart after just 2 summers outside. How did medieval blacksmiths, with no electricity and no chemistry, create metal that outlives modern steel by centuries? The answer will change everything you think you know about ancient technology. Let's dive in. Imagine this. You're standing inside a climate-controlled museum vault, a place where every artifact is locked away like a piece of time itself. A curator opens a drawer and gently lifts out an iron axe head forged around the year 1200. 8 centuries old. You hold it in your hands. It's dark, worn, and scarred by history. But the metal underneath feels solid, dense, alive. There's no crumbling, no deep pitting, no flaking orange dust. This tool survived hundreds of winters, countless storms, even entire empires rising and collapsing, yet the iron still endures. Now step out of that vault, walk to your own backyard, pick up the steel axe you bought at Home Depot 2 years ago. Already spotted with rust, isn't it? Leave it in the rain a few more seasons, and it might not even be safe to use. That contrast, 800 years versus 2 years, isn't just strange, it's unsettling. Because it raises a question that challenges everything we assume about progress. How can medieval iron, made in clay furnaces with no electricity, no chemistry textbooks, and no precision engineering, outlast modern steel designed in billion-dollar factories? If all our technology is superior, shouldn't our tools survive longer? Shouldn't our steel resist the environment better? Shouldn't our materials represent the peak of human knowledge? But the truth? Modern steel rusts faster not because it's cheap, though that's part of it. Not because we're cutting corners, though we often do. But because the very things medieval smiths left inside their iron were the exact things our factories remove. Impurities that weren't flaws, but hidden advantages. Before we dive into medieval metallurgy, I want to take you on a short mental journey. Picture a medieval blacksmith. Sweat pouring, hammer ringing, sparks exploding with every strike. He isn't trying to mass-produce anything. He isn't racing a clock. He's shaping a tool that someone's family will depend on. A tool expected to last decades, maybe generations. He works slowly because slow is the only way to make iron behave. And, ironically, the imperfections he leaves behind become the reason his tools survive centuries. Meanwhile, modern factories melt iron completely, refine it aggressively, purify it until it becomes a blank, perfect-looking material that is strong on paper, but defenseless in the real world. So today we're going to answer one of the strangest questions in material science. Why did iron from the Middle Ages resist rust better than steel from the hardware store? And what secrets about durability, craftsmanship, and even our modern lifestyle hide behind that simple mystery? This is not a story about nostalgia. It's not about old is always better. It's a story about choices, what ancient smiths chose to keep and what we chose to throw away. Because sometimes, the past didn't fall behind the future. Sometimes, the future left something important behind. To understand why medieval iron can survive for centuries, we have to look at the material we trust today, modern steel. At first glance, it seems obvious. Modern factories produce metal using advanced chemistry, controlled temperatures, industrial purity, and massive machines. Everything about it should be superior, stronger, cleaner, longer lasting. But that's the exact problem. In the pursuit of perfect steel, we removed something essential, something medieval blacksmiths didn't even know they were protecting. Let's start with a basic truth. Modern steel is almost too pure for its own good. The bars, sheets, and tools you buy today are usually made from mild steel, a material engineered for speed, consistency, and convenience. Industries need steel that can be cut, shaped, welded, and rolled with minimal resistance. Every impurity, phosphorus, silica, natural slag, slows the machines down. So our entire metallurgical system is designed to strip the ore clean until almost nothing remains but iron and a small percentage of carbon. From an engineering standpoint, it's brilliant. From a durability standpoint, it's a disaster. Because once you purify iron that far, you also remove the natural defenses that once helped ancient metal survive harsh environments. Without those extra minerals and microscopic structures, modern steel rusts in a very straightforward and very destructive way. Imagine a raindrop landing on a modern steel surface. This simple moment sets off a chain reaction. Oxygen begins bonding with the iron. 1. A thin dusting of rust forms. 2. That rust is porous, flaky, and unstable. 3. Moisture gets trapped inside these pores. 4. Rust accelerates downward, deeper and deeper. It's like termites entering wood. Once they find a path, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. Rust in modern steel behaves the same way. It follows internal grain boundaries, tiny crystalline gaps inside the metal. Even a microscopic weakness becomes a tunnel for corrosion. This is why your garden tools, fence posts, or cheap screwdriver can go from brand new to falling apart in just a couple of years. Modern steel isn't weak, it's simply unprotected. Now contrast that with medieval iron. While our steel is engineered to support machines, medieval iron was engineered only by nature and the hands of a craftsman. The ore they used wasn't purified in massive furnaces. It was reduced gently, partially, and inconsistently. And because the process wasn't perfect, the metal they produced contained things our factories consider flaws. But these flaws were miracles in disguise. Tiny strands of slag, glassy fibers formed from melted minerals, became trapped in the iron. Blacksmiths stretched these fibers through the metal with every hammer strike. Under a microscope, these look like the grain of wood, running in thin, protective lines. And when rust begins forming on medieval iron, those fibers act as physical barriers. Instead of tunneling downward, corrosion is forced to spread sideways, slowing its progress dramatically. It's like putting up 1,000 tiny walls inside the metal. Rust can climb, it can spread, but it cannot dive. Without those impurities, modern steel is like a home with no insulation and no internal walls. Once corrosion gets inside, nothing stops it. Here's the surprising part. Even modern material scientists admit that medieval iron is extremely difficult to replicate today, not because we lack the technology, but because our entire industrial system is optimized for the opposite purpose. Slag slows machines. Phosphorus causes welding issues. Natural mineral inclusions make mass production messy and inconsistent. In short, our steel is designed to be easy to manufacture, not to last forever. We trade longevity for convenience every single day, usually without realizing it. If medieval blacksmiths could observe our factories today, they'd be stunned by our precision, but confused by our priorities. They'd ask why we intentionally remove the very substances that give iron its resilience. And they'd wonder why we choose speed over endurance, quantity over craftsmanship. This doesn't mean medieval iron was better overall. It wasn't stronger, it wasn't harder, it wasn't more uniform. But for resisting rust, for standing the test of time, it had advantages modern steel simply doesn't. And here's the twist. Those advantages weren't designed. They were accidents, gifts of geology and slow, imperfect craftsmanship. But those accidents kept the metal alive. In the next section, we'll explore why ancient iron had such unique internal structures, the surprising chemistry of bog iron, the geological quirks of medieval ore sources, and how nature itself created the subtle armor that modern metallurgy lost. If medieval iron seems almost magically resistant to rust, it's because its journey began long before the blacksmith ever touched it. The secret starts in the ground itself, inside wetlands, mountain slopes, and ancient riverbeds, where minerals were shaped not by machines, but by the slow, patient work of nature. Medieval Europe and Asia didn't choose their ore because of chemistry. They chose it because it was there, because the land offered them raw material that behaved in ways they didn't fully understand, but learned to trust. One of the most important sources of medieval iron was something called bog iron, a material that forms naturally in marshes. Imagine a swamp where minerals seep up through groundwater, then slowly precipitate into soft nodules of iron-rich earth. These deposits renew themselves every few decades, making bog iron one of the first sustainable resources long before the term existed. But bog iron carried a hidden blessing. It was naturally rich in phosphorus, a mineral modern steel plants intentionally remove. Smiths of the Middle Ages had no concept of phosphorus atoms, oxidation layers, or protective coatings, but they knew something very simple. Tools made from certain marshlands resisted rust better than others. They didn't know why. It took modern scanning electron microscopes to reveal the answer centuries later, but they followed the evidence of their own hands. When phosphorus-rich iron oxidizes, it forms a dense, tight, almost ceramic-like layer of protective material. This surface doesn't flake off like modern rust. Instead, it seals the metal underneath, acting like a natural armor. If medieval iron seems immortal, it's partly because nature gave it a gift our industrial systems no longer allow. But the story goes deeper. Across the world, medieval smiths discovered that iron from different regions had different personalities. In Spain, for instance, the iron around Toledo contained traces of nickel and chromium, the same elements that give modern stainless steel its corrosion resistance. In southern India, the ore used for Wootz steel carried microscopic mixes of vanadium, tungsten, and carbon that produced astonishing patterns and durability. These weren't deliberate alloying techniques, they were geological coincidences. Yet these accidents became foundations of legendary craftsmanship. Still, none of these natural advantages would have mattered without one crucial human invention: the bloomery furnace. Unlike modern blast furnaces, which melt iron completely into a homogeneous liquid, bloomery furnaces never reached temperatures high enough to liquefy metal. Instead, they sat in a primitive but powerful sweet spot, hot enough to separate iron from ore, but cool enough to keep the metal solid. This single difference changed everything. Inside a bloomery, the iron formed as tiny metallic particles embedded in a bath of molten slag. When these particles clumped together into a spongy mass, a bloom, they trapped strands of that slag inside like threads in a textile. The smith, reheating and hammering the bloom repeatedly, stretched those strands into microscopic fibers running along the metal's length. These fibers became the internal grain of medieval iron. They acted like shock absorbers, like reinforcements, and, most importantly, like internal barriers that slowed rust to a crawl. Modern steel, by contrast, is melted into a flawless liquid, refined until nearly every impurity is gone. It's wonderfully uniform, perfect for mass production, but it lacks the internal architecture bloomery iron gained by accident. To understand this difference, imagine comparing a piece of polished glass to a piece of laminated safety glass. One is pure and beautiful. The other is messy on the inside, but far more resilient. Medieval iron was the laminated version, imperfect, inconsistent, but structurally more prepared for decay. The bloomery process also produced uneven carbon absorption, meaning one bloom could contain pockets of soft iron, pockets of medium steel, and pockets of harder steel. What sounds like a flaw actually gave ancient smiths a palette of materials to work with. They could sort, mix, and combine these sections to craft composite blades, layered tools, or reinforced structures, each benefiting from the unique properties of the bloom. But perhaps the most important advantage wasn't chemical or metallurgical at all. It was philosophical. Bloomery iron couldn't be rushed. It couldn't be controlled by a timer. It demanded patience, hours of heating, hammering, folding, and observation. The blacksmith's eye measured the color of the metal. His hand felt its resistance. His intuition guided every decision. Where modern metallurgy seeks uniformity, medieval metallurgy embraced texture, a metal that carried the memory of the ore, the furnace, and the craftsman. And that texture, ironically, is exactly what made it survive. In the next section, we'll explore how medieval economics and culture shaped this search for durability, why a simple tool could cost a month's wages, why craftsmanship was policed by guilds, and why every hammer strike wasn't just shaping metal, it was shaping a family's future. When we talk about why medieval iron survived for centuries, it's easy to focus on chemistry, slag fibers, and the uniqueness of ancient furnaces. But the deeper truth is this: medieval iron didn't endure simply because the material was good. It endured because people expected it to. In a world without factories, without cheap imports, and without convenience stores, every piece of metal represented something almost sacred: time, labor, and survival. Imagine life in the 12th century. There is no Amazon truck coming tomorrow, no hardware aisle packed with $5 hammers. If your plow breaks during planting season, you don't shrug it off. You don't just get another one. A failed tool isn't an inconvenience. It is a threat to your family's livelihood. And because the stakes were so high, a tool wasn't merely an object. It was an investment that might cost a month's wages, sometimes more. A sword could represent half a year's work. An axe head might equal the price of feeding your household for weeks. When a tool was that valuable, it wasn't something you lost, neglected, or replaced. It was something you cared for. And that care began with the blacksmith himself. A medieval blacksmith wasn't an anonymous worker on a production line. He was a craftsman whose reputation lived and died with every tool he made. If a blade snapped in battle or a chisel failed during harvest, the customer didn't blame bad luck. They blamed the smith. And in a system run by strict guilds, one failure could cost him everything. Expulsion from the guild meant losing the right to sell iron entirely, losing your career, your status, your livelihood. That pressure didn't create fast production, it created meticulous production. Every strike of the hammer mattered. Every reheating, every fold, every choice of material was deliberate. A medieval smith wasn't producing for volume. He was producing for survival, his own and everyone who depended on his work. This expectation of durability carried into everyday life. Tools weren't temporary, they were heirlooms. Families passed down axes, knives, and farming irons the way we pass down jewelry or watches today. A good blade might serve a father, then a son, then a grandson. People didn't treat tools casually because replacement was nearly impossible. If you owned a piece of iron, you cared for it the way we care for cars or expensive instruments now. After every use, tools were cleaned, dried, and oiled. They were stored indoors, not left outside in the rain. People handled metal with an understanding that its life was tied to their own. And the blacksmiths themselves contributed to that longevity with a process modern consumers almost never think about. Fresh iron is vulnerable. It needs protection. Medieval smiths knew this instinctively. After forging a new tool, they heated it gently, then rubbed it with linseed oil or rendered fat. The heat transformed the oil into a thin, hard film bonded directly to the metal, a primitive but incredibly effective protective coating. As the tool was used, its surface slowly developed a dark, stable patina made mostly of magnetite. Unlike the flaky red rust we see on modern steel, this black patina was dense and protective. It didn't fall away. It stayed on the metal like armor. The more the tool was used, the stronger the patina became. Medieval people didn't fight oxidation. They guided it. They turned it into a shield. This kind of maintenance feels foreign to us today because our world changed. Steel became cheap. Tools became disposable. Replacement became easier than repair. Why oil a $15 hatchet when you can buy a new one? Why store tools carefully when the cost of failure is so low? Modern society doesn't demand respect for metal, so we stopped giving it. And in losing the mindset, we also lost the knowledge, little rituals of care that once made iron nearly immortal. So yes, medieval iron had natural advantages: slag fibers, phosphorus, unique ore. But those advantages were amplified by a culture that valued durability above all else. The materials resisted rust, the smiths forged with extreme care, and the people who used the tools sustained that protection for decades. Longevity wasn't an accident. It was an agreement between earth, craft, and human intention. In the next chapter, we'll explore how medieval smiths pushed this even further, combining soft iron and hard steel, welding layers, and creating composite blades that rival modern engineering. Tools that didn't just survive, but excelled. To truly appreciate why medieval ironwork is still admired today, we have to step back into the workshop of a craftsman who understood something modern factories rarely consider: that iron is not a single uniform material, but a living spectrum. Inside every bloom pulled from a medieval furnace, there were hidden pockets: soft iron here, harder steel there, and streaks of slag woven throughout like tiny rivers of glass. Where modern metallurgy sees inconsistency, medieval smiths saw opportunity. Picture a blacksmith examining a fresh bloom. It's not a neat ingot. It's a spongy, glowing mass that hisses and crackles when exposed to air. The smith slices off a fragment, touches it to a grinding stone, and watches the sparks. To the untrained eye, sparks are sparks. But to a seasoned smith, they're a language. Long, slow orange trails tell him the metal is soft iron. Sharp, branching white bursts tell him it's higher carbon steel. Every spark pattern is a clue, guiding his hand as he sorts the bloom into piles. One for toughness, one for sharpness, one for flexibility. This wasn't guesswork. It was a form of practical metallurgy, a science built from thousands of hours of listening to metal talk. Once the bloom was red, the smith began creating something no blast furnace could replicate: a composite tool. He took strips of soft iron, prized for its ability to absorb shock without breaking. Then he paired them with thin layers of high-carbon steel, prized for its ability to hold a sharp edge. Heated to a white-hot glow, these pieces began to fuse at the surface, and with every strike of the hammer, they welded more tightly together. Layer by layer, the smith created a structure where each material did exactly what it was best at. The result wasn't just a blade. It was a partnership of materials. The steel edge sliced with precision. The iron spine resisted shattering. The slag fibers inside both layers formed microscopic patterns that slowed rust. In a way, medieval smiths were building early versions of laminate composites, centuries before engineers coined the term. What looks like artistry in old museums was actually engineering brilliance, achieved with nothing more than keen observation, heat, and patience. Some smiths pushed this concept even further, twisting bars of iron and steel before welding them together. As the layers fused, the different metals folded into swirling patterns that flowed like water when polished. Today, we call this pattern welding, and many people associate it with the legendary aesthetics of old blades. But for the smiths who invented it, the beauty was a side effect. What they cared about was performance. Pattern-welded metal had more internal boundaries, more slag-filled interfaces, and more mechanical diversity. And all of that meant one thing: resilience. Rust struggled to break through. Cracks struggled to grow. Shock waves struggled to spread. The blades simply held up better. The remarkable thing is that medieval smiths did all this without a single microscope or chemical formula. They didn't know about crystal grain boundaries or phase transformations. They didn't understand the atomic structure of iron-carbon alloys. But through observation, watching colors, listening to sounds, testing edges, they developed methods that echoed the logic of modern materials science. And nowhere is that more evident than in their quenching and tempering rituals. If you've ever heated a blade and plunged it into water, you know the sound: a violent hiss as steam erupts around the metal. But medieval smiths discovered something subtle. Pure water didn't work very well. it cooled unevenly. It created a steam barrier that slowed the quench. So they experimented. Salt water cooled faster. Urine, yes, urine, worked even better. Not because of superstition, but because its mineral content disrupted the steam envelope and pulled heat from the steel rapidly and consistently. They didn't have the vocabulary for it, but they understood the effect so deeply that guilds recorded exact recipes: when to quench, what liquid to use, how to judge the temperature by the color spreading across the blade. Pale yellow meant one level of hardness, bronze meant another, deep blue meant flexibility. The smith wasn't just crafting metal, he was choreographing a transformation inside the iron's crystal structure, using only his eyes and the memory in his hands. Every step of the process, sorting, welding, quenching, tempering, turned a chaotic bloom into a tool engineered with purpose. And even more surprisingly, every one of those steps contributed to rust resistance. The layered construction gave the tool multiple internal boundaries where corrosion slowed. The slag fibers acted like embedded shields. The patina from careful tempering created a stable surface layer that protected the metal beneath. These weren't intentional anti-corrosion strategies. They were the natural outcome of a slow, deliberate, human-driven craft. In the end, the secret of medieval composite tools wasn't magic. It wasn't myth. It was the willingness to embrace imperfection, not as a flaw, but as a resource. While modern steel seeks purity, medieval steel sought harmony. Where modern tools chase speed, ancient ones chased endurance. And where modern manufacturing tries to make every object identical, medieval craftsmanship allowed each piece to be unique, its own blend of earth, fire, and human intelligence. In our final section, we'll uncover the deeper lesson behind all of this: why medieval iron seems so extraordinary today, and what its survival reveals, not just about technology, but about us. And now, standing at the end of this journey, from the soils that birthed medieval iron, to the furnaces that shaped it, to the hands that turned chaos into craftsmanship, we arrive at a simple truth. Those ancient tools didn't survive because they were magical. They survived because they were the product of a world that valued durability in a way we rarely do today. Medieval iron lasted because it carried the memory of the land, the patience of the smith, and the respect of the people who used it. Every slag fiber, every uneven layer, every imperfect weld was part of a design that wasn't planned, but somehow was exactly right. The irony is that the flaws we try so hard to eliminate in modern steel were the very reasons ancient metal endured. But more than that, the story of medieval iron forces us to ask a bigger question. When did we stop building things to last? At what point did speed matter more than longevity? When did we trade craftsmanship for convenience? Maybe the answer isn't in chemistry or engineering. Maybe it's in our priorities. So the next time you hold a modern tool and watch rust creep across it, remember, it's not just about metal. It's about choice. Ancient smiths chose time, chose intention, chose permanence, and their work still stands to remind us of what we lost when we chose otherwise. If this story opened your eyes to the brilliance hidden in ancient technology, let me know in the comments. What forgotten invention should we uncover next? Bronze Age casting? Roman concrete? Damascus steel? Or something even older? Because sometimes the past doesn't just teach us. Sometimes it outperforms us.